When you walk into a store like the Home Depot or Lowe's and you look around the tool aisle, it feels like a massive battle between brands: Milwaukee, DeWalt, Makita, Ryobi, Kobalt, Craftsman, and so many more. Different colors, different price points, different marketing. And it looks like all of these companies are fighting each other for your money, but once you start digging into how the tool industry actually works, you start noticing something interesting. Now, some of these companies competing with each other, they're actually connected. Some brands don't even manufacture their own tools, and sometimes the biggest decisions about what tools succeed aren't made by the brands at all. They're made by the stores that are selling them. Yeah, there's a lot happening behind the scenes in the tool industry that most people never even notice, and honestly, some of this is pretty fascinating, so let's get into it. All right, let's start with something that a lot of people already know but don't always realize how big it is. Many of these brands that are competing in the tool aisles are actually owned by the same parent companies. For example, Milwaukee IA, some people know them as Milwaukee Tool, and Ryobi. Those brands look like direct competitors, different colors, different audiences, and different price points. But both of them are owned by the same parent company called Tektronix Industries, also known as TTI. Milwaukee targets professional contractors, Ryobi targets homeowners and DIY users. So instead of fighting over the same customer, they dominate two different parts of the market. Another example is Stanley Black & Decker. They own DeWalt, Craftsman, Stanley, and well, Black & Decker. So sometimes when you see those brands competing on the shelf, they're actually part of the same corporate family. The tool aisle looks like a battlefield, but sometimes the same company owns multiple soldiers. But not every brand works that way. Take Makita and the pesky Makita gnome. Makita is one of the few major power tool brands that is still largely independent. While other brands are owned by massive conglomerates, Makita is basically just Makita. They design their own tools, they operate their own factories around the world, and they rely heavily on their reputation rather than a parent company managing multiple brands. And that independence is one of the reasons why Makita is so slow to bring new tools to the market. And though dwindling over the past years, that's why they've maintained their still loyal fan base. Now, here's something that might surprise a lot of people. Some tool brands don't even own their own name. I'll take Ryobi, for example. The original Ryobi company in Japan still exists today. They pronounce it wrong, they call it Ryobi. But they mainly produce things like industrial components and die-cast parts. The Ryobi power tools sold in stores are actually produced under the licensing agreement with TTI. So when you buy a Ryobi drill at Home Depot, you're buying a tool built by TTI that uses the Ryobi name under license. Most customers never even realize that. Now, let's talk about one of the strangest situations in this tool industry. Ridgid, because Ridgid is actually two completely different companies depending on which aisle you're standing in. If you walk down the plumbing aisle and pick up a Ridgid pipe wrench, that tool is made by Emerson Electric. Ridgid plumbing tools have been around for over 100 years and are famous for pipe wrenches, threading machines, and professional plumbing equipment. But if you walk over to the power tool aisle and grab an orange Ridgid drill, Emerson didn't make that. Those tools are manufactured by TTI, the same company behind Milwaukee and Ryobi. Now, TTI licenses the Ridgid name for power tools and sells them exclusively through the Home Depot. So the orange Ridgid drill and the orange Ridgid pipe wrench sitting in the same store might look like they come from the same company, but they're actually made by two completely different manufacturers. And that's also why Ridgid's famous lifetime service agreement can sometimes be confusing, because legally it's a three-way relationship between Home Depot, TTI, and Emerson. Most people buying those tools never even realize that. Now, let's talk about something that happens during the biggest tool sales of the year. We're talking Black Friday, Father's Day, 4th of July, holiday promotions. You'll often see a drill and an impact combo kit advertised for something around $99, even though the normal kit sells for $199. And it looks like it's an incredible deal, but if you look closely at the model numbers, you'll often notice something very interesting. They're slightly different. These are often special promotional models created specifically for those sales. They're sometimes called promotional SKUs. That doesn't mean that they're bad tools, but they may include things like smaller batteries, simpler chargers, slightly different internal components, or sometimes brushed motors instead of brushless. They're designed specifically to hit that lower price point, so while the packaging might look identical, the tools inside can be slightly different versions built for those promotions. Once you start checking the model numbers during the sales, you'll start seeing it pretty much everywhere. Now, let's talk about something else that most people never realize. Some brands in the stores aren't actually manufacturers at all. Kobalt is a perfect example of this. Kobalt is a store brand owned by Lowe's. That means Lowe's controls the brand, but the tools themselves are manufactured by outside companies. Many of the modern Kobalt cordless tools are produced by large manufacturers called Chevron. Chevron also produces brands like Skill, Ego, Outdoor Power Equipment, and recently Flex tools. I've also heard multiple insiders talking about how they believe Chevron makes and manufactures the tools for Makita that are sold in the United States market. I can't confirm that either way, however, it is interesting to think about. But when you walk into the Lowe's and you see Kobalt tools, they're not actually made by Lowe's. They're made by a manufacturing partner and sold under the Lowe's brand. And this is where things get even more interesting because retailers don't just sell tools, they strategically position brands. For a while, it looked like Lowe's might push Kobalt into the professional market, and I'm still hearing rumblings of this. They released the Kobalt XTR lineup with stronger motors, larger batteries, and higher torque numbers. But then Lowe's made a huge pivot. Instead of relying on Kobalt to compete with Milwaukee, they launched an entirely new brand called Flex. Flex was designed and marketed specifically for professional contractors. High torque tools, stacked lithium batteries, aggressive performance numbers. Everything about Flex was positioned to compete directly with Milwaukee's Pro tool lineup. And yeah, Flex was manufactured by the same company we talked about earlier, Chevron. So when you walked into a Lowe's store, Craftsman was targeted towards the DIY users, Kobalt sitting in the middle for a prosumer, and Flex and DeWalt were for the pro contractors. But in case you're not keeping up in the world of tools, Flex, well, they didn't really perform as a lot of people had hoped, and they recently got pushed out of Lowe's, no longer sold in-store or online. Same goes for the Skill brand. But it's a perfect example of how retailers aren't just selling tools, they're constantly moving brands around like pieces on a checkerboard, trying to counter whatever the competition is doing. And speaking of that competition, there's one brand that Home Depot pushes more aggressively than any other brand, Milwaukee Tool. Now, if you walk into a Home Depot store, Milwaukee usually has the biggest displays, the largest shelf space, dedicated end caps, and special promotion areas. And that's not by accident. Milwaukee is one of the biggest drivers of tool sales at the Home Depot. Because Milwaukee and Ryobi both come from TTI, well, Home Depot essentially has a powerful two-brand ecosystem locked into their store. Milwaukee dominating the professional market, Ryobi dominating the homeowner market. And that's an incredibly strong retail strategy. So when Lowe's pushes brands like Flex or Kobalt, they're essentially trying to counter that ecosystem. It's a constant strategic battle between the two retailers. And at the end of the day, none of this means the tool industry is dishonest. Competition between these brands, well, it's very real. Milwaukee wants to beat DeWalt, DeWalt wants to beat Makita, Makita wants to beat everybody, but they're not doing a very good job of it. And that competition has pushed tools to become incredibly capable. Cordless tools today are stronger, smarter, and more powerful than anything we had just 10 years ago. But once you start looking behind the scenes, you're beginning to notice things most people never think about. Who owns what? How retailers shape the market, and how the entire industry is built around ecosystems and brand positioning. Now, with all that said, I do believe that this year and the next couple years are going to be extremely interesting to see how the market plays out. I feel that you're going to have some brands that used to be considered DIY and maybe prosumer be pushed to a level of actually professional grade tooling. I also think that you're going to see some cool patents expire, and you're going to see these brands really start going after each other. And at the end of the day, it's a win-win for the consumer base, us. Now, I'm curious to know what you think about all this, and what is your favorite tool brand? Let me know in the comment section below. I love hearing that sweet feedback. And if you like this video, get subscribed, hit the bell notification, and smash that like button. It'd be greatly appreciated. Check out these videos. I think you're going to like them as well. They're real nice like. We'll be back with more videos soon.